Heat training camp is just weeks away, and there's excitement and mystery in the air. What are some of the questions that might define training camp? We'll answer that on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat Media members, and the best way to support the show is to leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app and subscribe on YouTube. A reminder that now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Training camp is about a month away, so we've got our 5 biggest questions facing the Heat in training camp. But before we get to that, the Heat will be holding camp in the Bahamas this year, David. They were in Boca Raton last year. They are moving it to the Bahamas this year, not for the first time. They've done this before in the past, but what do you think about the Heat in the Bahamas for training camp?
I think they're sending a message early on that they're trying to reset things and refocus. Like, there's something about having it in Boca where you still have where the players kind of can set the tone a little bit. They've got not necessarily the upper hand, but they can call the shots a little bit. They're a little bit closer to their respective entourages or families. They might lose focus. They can kind of, again, set the way things play out. Whereas if you take the trip to the Bahamas, yes, there's a lot to do there, obviously, but at the same time, you kind of just tweak things to the point where you're more focused on being there. You're there, you're sharing the camaraderie of being in the Bahamas together as a group, but it's also about making sure that you're focused on the day-to-day activities of being the best Heat player you can be. And I think that's the primary issue. I think that's what they were looking for. Like, they did it a couple seasons before the 22-23 season. And of course, they wound up going to the Eastern Conference Finals and the NBA Finals that same year. Not necessarily there's a correlation, but it was just, they lost the year before in the Eastern Conference Finals to the Boston Celtics in Game 7. And how do you respond from that? How do you refocus going into a season that's going to have absolute challenges to it? And so last year, there's the tension with Jimmy. There's the injury issues. There's, Terry Rozier's role, all these things that are going to be playing out to some degree over the course of the season, and that impacted last year. And you've got to say, you know what? That's all in the rearview mirror. Now is about winning basketball. And everybody's counted us out. And the Heat players love that to a fault. They're all about, being counted out. That's fine. That's the motivation we need. And now they go to the Bahamas and they just focus on the actual act of training and getting better.
It's boot camp, isn't it? It's
It
Bahamas
is.
boot camp, which you wouldn't put the two together usually, but that's kind of the sicko mode that the Miami Heat live in. That's what they do. I wonder how much Erik Spoelstra was inspired by his experience with Team USA. It's similar, right? You go to Vegas, you have your Vegas boot camp, you're getting ready. You go to Abu Dhabi, you're kind of doing your round robin friendlies with the other Olympic teams, and then you're in Paris for the Olympic Games. And I guess Erik Spoelstra just doesn't want to be home. He just wants to be on the road doing basketball stuff as much as he can, because now he's taken his team to the Bahamas. I think it's smart. I think it's good. I think this team does need to refocus. I think this team needs to have a pina colada on the beach, right? Like, we're gonna touch on some of the chemistry issues that could potentially be brewing with this team a little bit later on. But a good way to subvert that is pina coladas on the beach in the Bahamas in October and September. So it might
Kind of
be
forcing
something.
chemistry to manifest. It's like by being all together here and just all of us together, it's
Team
kind of,
outing.
you better figure it out. Better figure it out.
It's like 2-a-days all day, and then celebrate with some seafood and the sunsets, right? And some daiquiris. But our friend Brendan Tobin was talking about this the other day, and he says that flat out the Heat don't deserve to go to the Bahamas. And I kind of like that take, because they don't really deserve to go to the Bahamas after last season. Like, they haven't earned that vacation. But to your point, this is what Spo has done, right? It's coming off of that disappointment that, hey, where can we do a boot camp and where can we build some camaraderie? Understanding that maybe we weren't exactly the most tight-knit group over the course of last season. And there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. Like you said, there's a lot of challenges coming up. But Erik Spoelstra can only do what Erik Spoelstra can do. And taking his team to the Bahamas and trying to build something there is one thing that he can do. So we've got a bunch of questions that we want to get to. We're going to start with number one. Who are the starters? So the theme of these questions is training camp questions. What are the things that we might get answers to during and then coming out immediately after training camp? And one thing I think we might know is at least what Erik Spoelstra is leaning towards for a starting lineup to start the season. Obviously, Spo can change that throughout the season, as he is wont to do and has done several times in his Heat tenure. But in terms of who the starters are right now in training camp, going into preseason, opening day of the regular season, I think that's something that Erik Spoelstra is going to be evaluating very seriously at training camp. He's going to be testing a lot of different combinations. But one thing I know for sure in Sharpie, it's Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler. And the other three, if it's the preferred starting lineup at the end of last year, it would be Nikola Jovic, Terry Rozier, and Tyler Hero. We've talked about this before. They probably have the inside track, but I don't think anything's guaranteed for those other three spots.
No, you even recall last season's training camp. It was Kyle Lowry pronouncing himself the starter and whether or not he deserves to start, and a lot of debate about that. And, we talked about it on this show, and then he eventually wound up emerging as the starter. So we'll find out all about these kind of battles, like what they're looking at, who they might be thinking about. They'll see changes here and there if it's just those two, or if it's not the starting lineup from last year at the end of last year. So there'll be a lot to figure out, and I think we'll get some clarity on it throughout, periodically. Like you're going to see a starting lineup where he feels most comfortable with, but then you'll see changes. Maybe Tyler will lead the second unit. Maybe Rozier will lead the second unit. Maybe Jaquez will start over Jovic, etc. So you'll see maybe Ware gets a little bit some playing time.
I think Spo's going to experiment with all of it, and I can't wait for those Instagram videos that the Miami Heat release from the Bahamas, and one team in the red jerseys, one team in the white practice jerseys, and we're like, oh my God, what are the combinations that Spo is trying? But we have learned stuff from those little like Zapruder film kind of diagnoses before, where it's oh wow, Omer Yurtseven and Bam Adebayo are on the same team in training camp. What does that mean? And it meant that Spo was experimenting with that before. Obviously, Yurtseven hurt his foot. That's years ago. It doesn't matter. But I think we'll start to see some of that. I know the other part of this too is Spo going to shake things up? I know that was the question that you had. What did you mean by that?
Right. I wonder whether or not he's going to do things differently than he has in the past, because it feels like there are different stakes kind of lined up with the season. We don't know what's going to happen with the Jimmy Butler situation. We don't know whether or not there's a need to kind of blow up this roster. And I feel like even though last year was supposed to, at least per Pat Riley, was supposed to be the year where they evaluate this team in year 5 and figure out whether or not they're legitimate, whether or not they're not. But they never really got to that point because of injury. Injury was clouding everything. And so even the perception of what this group was limited because, well, you never saw them entirely healthy and you never knew exactly what they could do. So I wonder whether or not they go with that sense of, maybe we're still trying to figure out what this group is, or if they're just saying, you know what, we're going to dictate the terms. And by that, I mean Spo and the coaching staff. Are they going to define what this team kind of focuses on, whether it's defense, offense, generating something differently, changing the lineup, not being afraid to hurt feelings? And I know that kind of ties into the starting lineup, but we've talked about before that maybe Tyler, it's not necessarily about hurting feelings because they're all professionals and
hurting
men,
egos,
etc. Yes, that comes with it, and you have to manage these things as a coaching staff. And anybody that thinks differently has no idea what they're talking about. It's about making sure you get a sense of camaraderie, an understanding, an alignment with all these players. So I think it definitely matters, and I'm curious to see whether or not we'll get reports of things being tweaked to a high degree.
I wonder if they do move Tyler Hero to the bench specifically, because there has been this notion that Erik Spoelstra, and not necessarily a notion, but there has been an effort by Erik Spoelstra and the Miami Heat to get Tyler Hero to take that next step and get to that next level offensively and kind of maybe be a number 1 or number 2 option. I think last year, having not traded him for Damian Lillard, first of all, and then kind of being where he was, it just feels like maybe there's this acceptance that Tyler Hero is just not going to be that guy. And if you've now accepted that Tyler Hero is not going to be sort of this number 1 on the same level of Damian Lillard, Devin Booker kind of person, kind of player, why not? Why not bring him off the bench, right? If you've already sort of accepted that, if the things that Udonis Haslem is saying on television, that there's just better chemistry with Duncan Robinson as opposed to Tyler Hero, and Hero can be the 6th man of the year and all these things, if all of that is true, then maybe there is a tweak there. To your point too, I wonder if Erik Spoelstra tweaks the offensive scheme. I think this team was way more heavily indexed on mid-range shots than it was supposed to be last year. They're upside down on the math. It was just impossible to have an efficient offense 2 years in a row with a bottom 10 offensive rating in the league. Something's got to change. Easier said than done. It's really hard to change a scheme without dramatic personnel change. I think that's the underrated part of that. You rarely see a complete scheme change with the same coach and the same personnel. So, but if anybody's going to do it, it's Erik Spoelstra, and he always says he doesn't pay attention to analytics. Trust me, he pays a lot of attention to the analytics and the lineup data and all those things. And if he's looking at the numbers from last year, he knows that that's not a viable offense that they were running last season for a lot of different reasons. If they're healthier, that obviously helps too. But we're going to continue along with some of our training camp questions here. Is Kel'el Ware ready to contribute? We'll tell you why training camp will be an important test for the Heat rookie after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book for many reasons. Well, they've got something different for you now. Through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers, new ones, old ones, and anyone in between, can bet $5 and you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Of course, the NFL season kicks off for real in the upcoming days here. We got games tomorrow throughout the rest of the weekend. It's exciting. The Dolphins, of course, taking on the Jaguars. There's a lot to look forward to with the season, and FanDuel wants to help you get as much as you can out of your NFL viewing experience. With a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon at a market game. And all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. So just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Moving on with our training camp questions. David, what young name will generate the most buzz this training camp?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer, and I'm not sure who it'll be. I think, last year, my reason for kind of including this question is, we heard a lot about Jaime Jaquez, and that makes sense considering he was the drafted rookie, and they needed a spark. They needed to add something to this rotation that had fallen short in the NBA Finals, and you were wondering, there was so much positivity about Jaquez, and he's such a great Miami Heat fit. But is he actually going to translate into being a good NBA player? And that's all we heard. We heard about his maturity, his unwillingness to back down, like his understanding of the game and actual competency. We saw a lot of that same type footage from the social media people in the Heat group, kind of just, showing a lot of work with Jaquez, learning low post moves from Kyle Lowry. It was just so much fun to kind of see this. We didn't see it the year before with Niko Jovic because I think he was mostly a deer in the headlights. He was so young, coming from Europe, didn't really understand how to make that kind of impact.
Like, I'm sorry, but like it made sense because Jaquez had the year he did, first team all rookie, and Nikola Jovic didn't have a great rookie season, right? He barely played. So, like, it's not just like a storyline and a headline that's coming out of training camp. It almost like kind of begets the breakout that's about to happen, or sort of the revelation that some of these young players are. So, your question of which young Heat player will generate the most buzz, I think it could also be reworded as, will any Heat player young Heat player generate a lot of buzz?
So I've got two names. I think one, the obvious choice, is because of the excitement already going into training camp of Kel'el Ware. I think that's going to be a name that certainly is going to be highlighted a lot. You're going to hear a lot about how Ware's just a big body. He's all of a sudden we have this verticality, etc.
Right.
But I think Josh Christopher is the guy that's going to be getting a lot of buzz. He just seems like he's so much more polished offensive player. And during training camp, you'll see a lot of those. He's going to get his buckets because I think that's where he's at this point in his NBA career and what we saw from him in Summer League. And I'm expecting him to just be one of those guys that's like, young fella kind of caught me by surprise. I didn't know he had that in him. And even some of the older vets, they're going to get burnt a little bit. He's going to score some buckets on them. And I think it's going to wind up turning into I'm impressed. This guy really showed something I didn't know he had. I was not familiar with your game, etc. So I'm curious to see if he could live up to that. But
he doesn't lack for confidence.
No, he doesn't.
And I think the same could be said for Keyshawn Johnson. I would expect a lot of people like, this guy's such a Heat guy. superlative
Right.
here, culture there, etc.
Yeah.
Like we'll get a lot of that with Keyshot, I think, for sure. I think we'll hear the same thing from Pelle Larsson. The Dan Marley comparisons might be brought up again that Udonis Haslem made. Talked about that on yesterday's show. But in terms of real buzz, right? Like real, like when we heard them talk about some of the young guys even last year, but it was heavy on Jaime. And
Yes.
you and I came out of Boca being like, is this guy this good? Because based on
Right.
everything that they're saying, this guy is going to be first team all rookie. And then he was. And so I do think Ware is the guy. And that to me is one of the big questions is Kel'el Ware ready? It's awesome what he did in Summer League. That's Summer League. Even training camp is going to be much stiffer competition in between those Miami Heat lines in the Bahamas ballroom. That's going to be tougher competition than anything Kel'el faced in Las Vegas. Guarantee it. He's going to be going up against Bam, Kevin Love, Thomas Bryant, like veteran, seasoned NBA centers. Again, not what he was going up against in Las Vegas Summer League. What does he look like there? What is Malik Allen, who Erik Spoelstra has called the best big man coach in the NBA, think of Kel'el Ware? How can they get him even better? Right? It's one thing with the Summer League coaching staff, which obviously did a great job en route to their championship there, but now you're getting Spo, Malik Allen, Caron Butler, Wayne Ellington, like this whole coaching staff now that is going to get their hands on Kel'el for the first time, really. Since his pre-draft workout. Erik Spoelstra for the first time, he wasn't even there for his pre-draft workout because he was doing the Olympic stuff. So, what more seasoning can Kel'el Ware get in the couple weeks that they're going to be in the Bahamas? I think that's fascinating, and I think they're going to know coming out of training camp if he's actually ready. And I don't care. Is he ready to start? Is he ready to come off the bench? Is he the backup center? Is he ready to play next to Bam? Those questions will all be answered. Is he ready for anything? Fill in the blank.
Yeah,
that's what's going to be answered in training camp. I think they're going to have a pretty good idea coming out of it. My next question is, go ahead.
No, I was going to say about the Ware. No, it's just, I think it's such a good point because, in Summer League, while you're still all competing for spots, you're kind of all in the same boat. Either you're a young draft pick or you're an undrafted player and you're competing. It's like you're at the same level. You've never played at NBA second, or you've played very few minutes at the NBA level. You don't have anything that you can kind of lord over anybody. There's no real hierarchy there, So I think it's kind of more like just the baseline is much more camaraderie. And whereas in training camp, there's a lot more tension involved. You're getting into these vets. They're going to try and attack you. They're going to try and challenge you. Oh, is this kid good enough? And if he responds to that in a kind of positive way, then I think that goes a huge step towards proving that he's ready for something. And what that role is, well, who cares?
And that was what we heard about Jaime, right? The guy is old school, veteran in a rookie body. We even heard that about Nico during last training camp. Well, he's walking around with his chest out, is what Jimmy Butler said, right? And then obviously Nico ends up being the starter at power forward by the end of the season. So you could tell a lot about kind of stuff in training camp, and a lot about how they carry themselves is a big part of it. My next question, speaking of Jimmy Butler, is Jimmy Butler due for a bounce back season? We've talked a lot about what could be a contract year for him. He's got the option to opt out of his contract next summer. Not a guarantee, but a possibility. But you've got Brian Windhorst on ESPN talking about how Jimmy Butler's going to be in killer mode, how this is fertile for a bounce back year for him, and all these things. I think we'll know in training camp what Jimmy Butler's mindset is. We obviously are not going to know until the end of the season how many games he plays, if he could stay healthy, all those things. That's not important. Well, it is important, but it's not going to be answered in training camp. What will be answered in training camp is he taking this seriously? What's the mindset? Is he going to play preseason games, which he didn't do last year? I think we'll know a little bit more about the mindset, positively or negatively, right? He could come out in training camp and have like a Minnesota Timberwolves, you better pay me kind of experience in the Bahamas, right? Like, hey, you want to take us in the Bahamas? Well, now you're locked into the Jimmy Butler experience, and I'm going to make life miserable for you. He could kind of go that route if he wants to, too. I doubt it.
Yeah.
But I do know a lot. I think we'll learn a lot about Jimmy Butler's mindset coming out of the Bahamas.
100%. I really think you're going to hear about, Jimmy, it looks rejuvenated. And maybe some of these things are overly simplistic or cliched. And even as reporters, you tend to kind of boil things down into easy to digest narratives because that's what people will understand most of all. But, you're going to hear about tensions. If even in thinly veiled comments, like if he says something that's like, well, we'll see how the season plays out. But I mean, my goal is the same, to get paid. If he says,
Jimmy, what was it, 2 years ago or a year ago, saying I'm not playing power forward? Or you know what I mean? Or like Kyle Lowry last year declaring himself the starter when it hadn't been decided by Spo. Right. Like there's obviously things that can come out of this.
Yeah, so I'm curious to see what version of Jimmy we get, and he's so masterful at this. Like, it's not just whatever he'll do if he does anything at media day, which I'm not sure. That's a question
Well,
for
he'll
another
talk,
episode, I suppose.
but yeah.
Yeah, no, for
He'll do
sure.
the
But does
podium,
he
that'll
go
be
in
it.
there? Yeah. Does he do the emo Jimmy again,
Oh, I
or
see
is
what you
that
mean.
like, is he going to go to that point and kind of like bring the attention to himself? Like, he's I think his body calendar, like, we've heard this from professional athletes all the time. Like, as the year kind of rolls over, you kind of get into this mode where now it's August, you start to get rejuvenated. By September, you're like fully prepared to already leap into camp. It's not like to say he hasn't been doing the work over the
Yeah,
offseason, but between going to poker tournaments and following up on football matches and soccer, and that's what I meant, and then everything else, like, is he laser focused on training camp and establishing himself as one of the top players in the NBA? And we'll find out. We'll
And
hear
starting the
about it from
season in mid-season mode, as opposed to what happened last year, where he was
Mhm.
slow out of the gate, and so were the Heat. Like, all that
Yes.
stuff is related. So, all right, which Heat player, other than Jimmy Butler, do we expect a lot from? Who else do we think we can learn something from during training camp? We're going to talk about that next year on Locked On Heat. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. If you're new to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on your favorite podcast app. David, let's talk about Bam Adebayo. We've already talked about Jimmy Butler, Miami's other all-star. Do you think Bam will have grown from Team USA?
Yeah, I'm curious, and I don't know. My personal feeling is that yes, he would. But what I meant by it with this question is, there's something about being kind of picked to be one of the top 12 players in the NBA, in a sense. Like, you're one of the top 12 American players, certainly, but you wind up going through the whole experience that you laid out already, going and earning your spot. And even whether he was starting or not doesn't matter, but playing a significant role in helping Team USA win and playing alongside all-time Hall of Fame greats, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, seeing them prepare, seeing them focus, seeing them, the attitude, just the sense that you belong. And it's the other side of the Jimmy Butler coin to me is that, if Jimmy winds up, for whatever either leaning into being the veteran leader that he is and the superstar player that he can be, or to your point earlier, if he pulls a get pay me kind of practice kind of thing, or
if
has
he
any
just,
kind of tension,
there's an in between too.
or
What if he
takes
kind
it
of
back
just goes?
too.
What if he just goes into a vacuum and he's in his Jimmy Butler vacuum and he's just a little bit
I'm
more
just here
isolated.
To play dominoes and practice every once in a while. That we've
Right.
seen
Like, he
that
could be like,
from
hey,
Jimmy. Yeah.
you want me to be all NBA Jimmy Butler? I could be all NBA Jimmy Butler, but I'm going to do it over here, right? And so I think that could be another option too, because Jimmy can be a little bit of an isolationist, I think, with that team. I'm not breaking news
Absolutely.
there. But yeah, he can be a little
And
bit of doing his own thing.
They're not going out together. Like, that's not who Jimmy is. Jimmy has his group of guys that he takes with him, and he has his interest and everything else, and that's
maybe
entirely fine.
Is that, now that you're talking, is taking the team to the Bahamas a little bit of a message that I wonder if Jimmy Butler is going to be able to bring his group to the Bahamas?
He's bringing them, and nobody's stopping him. I'm not reporting this. I'm just saying, based on everything I've ever seen from Jimmy and the way he interacts, like, good luck trying to stop him. It's like, I didn't know they were going to be there. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to confront him and be like, you're bringing your
just going to organize team activities, just like just pack the schedule, be like 7 a.m. breakfast, 8 a.m. lift, 9 a.m. practice. We're going to go from
Jimmy
9
will
to
find
12,
a way to play
12
spades
lunch.
He'll find a way to play spades at
6:01.
If he's got 1 hour, he's going to cram it in there doing whatever the hell he wants, because nobody puts Jimmy in a corner, and that's perfectly fine. Like, that's who he is. But
to your point about Bam,
then how does he respond? How does he take on more of the no? I see the writing on the wall. This is going to be my team eventually, and now I have to kind of start taking charge. We talked about the different styles of leadership in yesterday's episode, and I definitely think everybody should check that one out. But, like, do we see them working together on the same page to get the most of this group, or is there obvious tension from day one, or is there just a need for the kind of conflict, which isn't necessarily a bad thing? But if Jimmy's going to do his own thing, how does Bam, with the renewed confidence and the boosted ego of this past summer, how does he go into training camp being the different player that he has been?
So Bam was elevated to team captain last year. And so to say that he can even grow as a leader or take on a new role with this team, if you just look at some of you might be like, what? He's already the team captain. What are you talking about? He can. He could definitely grow in a leadership role. He was he's been very open about the fact that it wasn't easy for him taking on a leadership role last year, that there was a learning curve for him. I think between that and the Team USA experience, having a year under his belt of team captain, which if you know anything, like you've done any job in your life for a year, you are so much more confident coming back for year 2, right, in that job. And so I think there's going to be a certain amount of confidence with Bam in that. I think there's a lot of confidence in coming off that gold medal. Like you said, I'm one of the best 12 American players in the world. I was playing alongside LeBron, Steph, KD, and all these other Hall of Famers. I'm on path for my own Hall of Fame career. I'm the dude. I am that guy with the capital G.
Yeah,
and when we talk about walking around with your chest out, I think Bam's chest is going to be more out than it ever has been in training camp. He's going to be walking around that Bahamas ballroom being like, this is my team, right? I'm not dumb. I know the Jimmy Butler contract situation. I know the status of that. I don't know how much longer he's going to be here. It might be forever. It might until he retires. It might not be. I don't know. Either way, it's my team now.
And he should carry both medals around his neck at all times.
That'd be great. And a little team captain patch.
Yes. Sew it onto every item of clothing he's taking with him. Just a reminder.
Just onto the sleeve.
I've got 2 of these.
Yep. The other question you had was about Terry Rozier. Does he establish himself as a veteran leader? I thought it was interesting that you wanted to bring this up.
We heard from him last year that it was just very different. You're trying to get – he had wanted to be a part of the Heat organization for so long. We know about how he looked up to Dwayne Wade. That had been a role model for him. He wears the same number for a reason. Like he had wanted to be a Miami Heat player for a long, long time, even as he was thriving elsewhere. But, he also talked about being traded and – not knowing his role here. You're just trying to figure it out. You don't want to step on any toes. There's already egos on this. You've got Jimmy Butler with hurt feelings about the loss of his friend Kyle Lowry being traded in order to acquire Rozier. You've got Bam kind of figuring things out. You've got all the injury issues. Tyler Hero wondering, right, what does the acquisition of Rozier mean for me? And you've got to try to figure out a way to blend in, etc. And then we start to see more confidence grow from Terry and understanding just be me. And that's what everybody keeps telling me. Be me, play my style of game, etc. And eventually he gets to that point and we're going, okay, this is the Rozier experience that they traded for. And then it's all cut short too quickly. Well, now you have a full summer of training, of being in South Florida, of understanding how things work, of knowing what the roles are or how the roles are going to change and knowing what your role is specifically. And he is a veteran on this team. We talked about the young core in yesterday's episode, but today it's about the veteran leadership. And he is one of the better veterans on this team. And he has to be able to go into camp showing that, or at least he should, in my opinion. So I'm curious to see whether we start to hear. Nobody on this roster has seen training camp Terry Rozier. What does that look like? How vocal is he? What does he defer? Does he kind of take charge?
I think it's going to be as important for him as maybe anybody else on this roster outside of the rookies.
Sure.
To have this training camp with the Heat staff, because now they're going to be going through these scrimmages, and Erik Spoelstra could just yell at him, hey, take that shot, or hey, don't take that shot. Pass it to the corner to your all-star teammate or whoever it might be. And I think that's going to be great for him trying to figure out his role also. When we talked earlier about Spo experimenting, he's going to be able to figure out who is it that Terry Rozier has the chemistry with. Does he gel with anybody in particular? I think there was a lot of chemistry between him and Bam Adebayo based on what we saw sort of on the fly last season, sort of building the plane in the sky kind of pick and roll dynamic that they had together between Bam and Terry. Is that something that they lean a little bit more into? Do they decide that Terry can't be on the floor with Tyler Hero? Do they see something in training camp that's very surprising and say, you know what? They're great together. Let's keep this thing going. We have a dynamic backcourt offense. Like, whatever it might be, I think it'll be really beneficial for Terry Rozier to get that guidance and sort of that nudging in one direction or the other for him to be like, no, do this. Don't do so much of that, or whatever it might be. The last thing here we want to talk about is chemistry. It's the last thing I want to hit on. We already sort of alluded to the possibility of tension like there was last year with Kyle Lowry and Erik Spoelstra, whether or not Lowry's going to start or not. The year before that, Jimmy Butler, is he going to have to play the 4? Does he not want to? All these things. But with, obviously the big thing lingering now is Jimmy Butler's contract and the fact that he wants to have a big year and potentially earn one last big contract for his career. I think there's a lot of other things too, right? I think you've got a lot of young players. It used to be just Tyler Hero. Jaime Jaquez is going to want more. Nikola Jovic is going to want more. Kel'el Ware is going to want to get on the court. Pelle Larsson is going to want to get on the court. Like there's there's a lot of sort of like Terry Rozier and Tyler Hero, just like we were talking about. Terry Rozier with the rest of the team. Duncan Robinson. What is he going to keep growing? Does he want more opportunity on his plate? Right. This guy, like, he could be a free agent in a couple of years. He's going to want another big contract too. Nobody's talking about that. Kevin Love re-signing. He's going to want playing time. There's a lot of different interests kind of here. That's not to say it's a bad thing. You go into every year, every team has a lot of 15 different players have 15 different interests. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what the chemistry looks like, because we're going into year 6 of this thing. And you don't see teams stay together this long that haven't won a championship in these days. You just don't see it anymore. And I'm reminded a little bit of the Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan Clippers, where it just got to a point where they hated each other and they just couldn't play with each other and they had to break it up. And that team never won a championship. And that team never got to the finals either. And that would be the difference. This Heat team got to the finals twice. And it's a very different sort of leadership dynamic and all those things. But the point being is that it's really hard for NBA players to stay together this long without egos maybe getting the better of them, and the disease of me that Pat Riley talks about and all these things. That's all real stuff. It's why Pat Riley wrote a book about it.
Yes. No,
does that take hold? Do we start to see a little bit? It's just a question, not prediction. It's just a question.
No, and it's one that certainly has to be answered, and we'll get glimpses of it. We'll hear from reporters on site and things of that sort. But we're not going to really see these things, because again, it's training camp. Even if there is tension, and there will always be tension, like we cannot expect it to be all hunky dory.
That's
even
such a good
with
point. There's always going to be tension. Some tension is good.
It's got to be
right?
controlled
Pressure
tension.
creates diamonds.
Controlled. Yes,
but some of that tension is needed, and Erik Spoelstra talks about a lot. Sometimes the tension gets to a point where it's overwhelming, and it's striking that balance.
Yeah, and you don't want anything simmering below the surface, which is where things get really dangerous. If it's overt and there are a lot of F-bombs being dropped, or even maybe a couple of punches thrown, like that's okay. That's okay. It's testosterone.
As long as they're not
sport.
Recorded. As long as they're not
well,
recorded,
I mean,
it's a Jordan.
Yeah, but it's not. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not that though. That's right. I think that manifests from having that tension. Draymond feeling like this kid.
Well, that got blown out of proportion because somebody recorded it. That was the big thing. But continue with the Heat.
No, but yeah. So I think there's going to be some tension, but how you kind of use that and help grow from it, if that's possible, then that'll go a long way towards defining what the attitude of this team is going to be like for the rest of the year. Because if you can go through everything together right away and survive that, then the challenges of the 82-game regular season, and it is a challenging one, a long one, a boring one for many players, like that really gets to the point where, you can kind of deal with this adversity together with the same kind of focus of winning games and getting to a title. I'm very curious to see if they start talking about that, because it seems laughable, right? Not just for Heat fans, but even across the NBA. Pundits would not think of the Heat as a contending team. But I wonder not whether the Heat players themselves buy into that, and like whether or not they think that they are legitimate contenders. And it's not just they've never been prone to just saying these things emptily. It's about a firm belief. No. We don't care what your predictions are. We don't care that other teams made changes. We know what we're capable of, and we're going to use this season to remind everybody that we can beat X team if given the opportunity and if we're healthy.
And that's the other part of it too, is this team is together for the most, like the core is. This team is actually very different than the team that went to the 2023 finals. No Gabe Vincent, no Caleb Martin, no Max Strus.
Sure.
You've got the young guys playing big roles, whatever. But the core is still basically the same. It's Jimmy and Spam, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, these guys. It's very much the same. It's been together now for 6 years. Like these star players, they're big three, they're whatever, have been together now for 6 years. Like that group should have a lot of chemistry. But last year was so derailed by injury. 30 plus different starting lineups. Right. You didn't feel like it. So you kind of like eliminate a year because they didn't really get that year together again. And I just wonder if that break disrupts that chemistry a little bit, or can that chemistry sort of be rebuilt with a training camp where everybody's healthy, where it looks like everybody's healthy right now, and everybody's locked in from opening tip, and does that chemistry help them overcome a Knicks team that's been changed a lot over the last couple of years, a Pacers team that's been changed a lot over the last couple of years? The Celtics obviously are the team to beat. They're the champions. They have a ton of chemistry, but like the Sixers are adding Paul George and all these things, right? Can the Heat, where chemistry wasn't really a thing for them last year because of all their injuries, can they stay healthy-ish enough and use chemistry to their advantage this year, where it felt like it was a disadvantage for so much of last year. I think we're obviously not going to know that until the end of the season, but you could start building some of that foundation in training camp, which I think is going to be really important. And again, probably why they're doing it in the Bahamas. That'll do it for us today. So excited for training camp. We got a lot more Heat content coming for you between now and training camp, obviously. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.